Welcome, one and all, to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you are having a great week so far. The week before Christmas. Hope everyone is getting in line to get their presents bought, or if you've already bought them, kudos to you. I'm still making out my list for my family and getting dirty looks every time I see them. So I guess we all have different perspectives on this time of year, but no. Hopefully, everyone is having a happy and safe holiday season. And Stephen, it is always good to talk with you. Happy holidays to you, sir. How have things been on your end?
Shawn, what's up, buddy? Yeah, man, it's I don't actually remember the last time you and I did one of these. We've done some crossover shows here recently. But yeah, it's always good to talk to you, of course. It is a busy time of year for everybody. Of course, Christmas is a week away and everybody's shopping and getting stuff done. So the one group of people who apparently aren't that busy is the team that we cover, unfortunately. I don't know, Alex is still making out his shopping list as well. But we have gone yet again another, I think the last time we did a show was on Sunday. So we've gone another 4 days without a move of any note to talk about, which is becoming the norm, unfortunately, this offseason. So we do have a couple small things to get to tonight. The Braves made some announcements about, Fan Fest and some TV stuff that we're going to talk about. And hopefully, MLB offices typically close pretty early next week. So the Braves probably have another 3 or 4 days before Christmas officially gets here to make a move. It would be tremendously helpful for us who have to make content if they would make a move before Christmas so that we would have something to talk about. But as we've seen so far, that's certainly not guaranteed. So, but yeah, man, it's always good to do these with you.
Yeah, agreed. And that's the thing about it is that, a couple of things, really, set this in place, with this being so close to Christmas. Number one, it's not just the fact that the Braves haven't made a move. They've been radio silent, right? Like there's been very little rumors or connection to, talks or anything like that. We've heard very little in the form of, moves or focus players that the Braves are focused on. Bob Nightingale said the Braves were finalists in the Garrett Crochet trade. That's fine. We did hear some rumblings that the Braves, could have been talking with Willie Adames before he went to the Giants. That's just general talk. But we are not seeing a lot of rumors. We're obviously not seeing a lot of activity. And beyond that, it's the fact that, number one, the Braves have more needs this offseason. They still need a starter, a reliever, and another outfielder. If it's to be, really an ideal offseason for this team, they have several needs that they need to address. They have not done anything, that has clearly. They have not made a move that clearly has directly addressed one of those needs as of yet. But even more so than that, Stephen, fellow Hammer Territory podcaster Scott Coleman, you and him were going back and forth in our chat about just how much heavy lifting Alex Anthopoulos usually does before the Christmas holiday, and he's done very little. It's been a very uncharacteristic start to the offseason for the Braves. Not saying that means it's going to be a disappointing offseason 2 months from now, but it's just been uncharacteristic to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, if and we said it at the beginning of the offseason, if you go back and look at Alex's history of his winters as the Braves GM, he does a lot of heavy lifting in November and early December. Like it's not uncommon at all. I remember the Will Smith signing, the Josh Donaldson signing, the Brian McCann signing, the Sean Murphy trade, the Jared Kelenic trade, the Joe Jimenez signing, the Travis d'Arnaud signing, the original one. You can go on and on and on. There has always been major activity early in the offseason for Alex. And I think the difference this offseason is that the market has been so incredibly hot. And Alex strikes early because I think he's looking for a deal. And he's been able to find those in years past that he's just not able to find right now. And I get it. There's a lot of angst. There's a lot of angst amongst Braves fans right now. If you're on Twitter or X or whatever the hell it's called, you see it every day. People are angry. And I'll say this about that, because there's been a lot of conversation about it. If you are judging the offseason before the offseason is over, then I think what you're doing is dumb. If you are somebody that simply just wants a move, to have something to talk about because that's the position that like we're in. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Like other teams are making moves. And so as a Braves fan, you get a little FOMO, like you want to move to talk about, you want to move to think about, and a move to dream about. And like, I get that. That stuff to me is fine. When people are just like, I just want to move, I don't really have a problem with that. The thing I have a problem with is people that are already prejudging the offseason before it's even over. Alex is not doing this. Alex is not going to do it. The Braves aren't going to spend any money. The old Braves are back. That stuff is nonsense, and that stuff needs to be called out. And I know Jeff Passan went on Atlanta radio this week, and I think some of the hosts on there were trying to rip Alex a little bit for his lack of moves so far. And I think Passan pointed out, like, listen, this is not his type of market, and that's true. It's not. He is not a guy that's just going to, add 20% to a guy's free agent value and say, yeah, let's do it. That's just not what he does. For better or for worse, it's not always the right thing. I'm not saying he bats 1,000, but I think in general he's done pretty good. So, if you're somebody who just wants to move, I get it. I'm right there. Trust me. You should see our DMs that we send every day to each other on this podcast. I mean, we're desperate for anything to talk about for content. So I completely get that. But if you're already prejudging the offseason before it's even over, you got to relax. I mean, come on. This Alex has been one of the best front office execs the last 7 years, and he's at least earned the benefit of the doubt of waiting till the offseason is over before we judge the offseason. I think that's a perfectly reasonable request. So I get one. I don't truly understand the other. But yeah, it's been frustrating, and we're just waiting on that kind of first big addition. They've done some minor league stuff that we'll talk about here in a second, but we haven't seen that big major league addition yet, and we're just waiting.
Now, as much heavy lifting as Alex Anthopoulos has done in the offseason, I also want to point out, and there's been extenuating circumstances in a couple of these examples, but I also want to point out that some of the biggest moves that he's made during his tenure as Braves GM have been later on in the offseason. For instance, he signed Chris Sale, I believe it was December 30th. Yeah, it was December 30th of 2023. He didn't sign Marcell Ozuna until January 21st of 2020, before COVID hit. And of course, though, it was due to the lockout after the 2022 season, 2021 season, he traded for Matt Olson in March. So the thing I'm getting at is that even though we see a lot of the heavy lifting, Alex Anthopoulos still has found good deals that obviously for multiple years have paid off in the case of Olson or Ozuna, or paid off perhaps in the best move he's made as a GM in Chris Sale. So just though we have not yet seen something occur, that does not mean that since it hasn't happened yet, the chances of it not being significant are much higher than they were 6 weeks ago. There's still plenty of potential moves that can be made. And if there is a GM in baseball who typically is going to find a way to make an unexpected move that will prove to be more valuable than anybody could have anticipated, no one has a better track record in that avenue than Alex Anthopoulos.
Yeah, and I think some of the angst is tied to the free agent market, just watching names dwindle. People just are checking names off like, well, the Nathan Eovaldi signing with the Rangers, I think really set some people off because that was one of the few names, that was one of the few rumors that we've actually had where Mark Bowman reported early in the offseason that they were interested in Eovaldi. So when he signed, it set people off. And then Max Fried signed with the Yankees, which set off a whole nother round of, another fan favorite signing somewhere else for big money. The Mets signing Soto didn't help, certainly. So I understand where the angst is coming from. And, Alex is just waiting for his type of move. And in the past, he's been able to find those very quickly. And like you said, there's been times where he's waited to the end of the winter to find a deal that he likes as well. I have no doubt that there are moves coming. I know people are like, they're not going to do anything. They're resetting the luxury tax. And if they did nothing, they would be reducing payroll by like $30 million from last year. And I just can't imagine a world where in the middle of this World Series contention window, while the battery is packed every night and they're printing money over there, that they would cut payroll by $30+ million. That doesn't make sense to me. And until I see it happen, I absolutely will not believe it. I am still firmly in the camp that they are going to make moves. I think they're going to make some significant moves. It will probably be names that we have not talked about like it normally is, but I do think they're coming. So we just got to wait for them.
And I know that Alex, depending on how you want to use this phrase, I know Alex doesn't make a move. He's not reactive, right? He doesn't make a move just because another team does. He tries to be proactive in making a move that makes sense for the Braves. But to your point, we're in the middle of this contention window. We do have some money freed up. We made it a point to free up money, and we have even more reason because, again, I understand he doesn't make moves to be reactive, but it's also just common sense that if the Mets and the Dodgers are continuing to get better, you need to get better yourself. He knows it. He knows now is the time to continue to be aggressive and see what can be done. And to your point, Stephen, I think that we are going to see those moves made in time. But that doesn't mean that of the move that even though no clear cut, no, just straightforward move has been made to again address, the need for a starter, a reliever, or an outfielder yet this offseason, that doesn't mean that it's not worth discussing some of the new faces that have been brought into the organization. Several former Nationals have been brought into the organization via minor league signings. I know that the big one that we've talked about so far is Brian De La Cruz, who's a former Marlin and Pirate. But Stephen, a couple of older relievers, familiar faces, and an outfielder have recently been brought into the organization to come into spring training to maybe have an outside shot at making the team. Just anything catch your eye when it comes to the minor league sightings we've seen for the Braves over the past week or so?
Yeah, Connor Capel is probably the most interesting name. He's an outfielder. He's actually had pretty good numbers as a major leaguer. I think he's got a career like 120 WRC plus. He just hasn't played a lot. He doesn't have a ton of innings and at bats, but he's got like a career 360 on base percentage or something like that. I was talking to somebody on Twitter. I would not be surprised if he ended up being the better player versus Brian De La Cruz, who got all the attention. So yeah, he's a guy that's interesting to me. There was the Jordan Weems. I'm not going to say signing because the Braves still haven't confirmed that, but there was the Jordan Weems report that he was signing a minor league deal with the Braves. If that does end up happening, then he's a guy that throws hard. He can throw 98, can touch 99. He has no clue where it's going most of the time. His walk totals in the majors have been scary to say the least, but he does throw hard, and you can't teach that. So, if you can find a pitching coach that can help him with his command, then, for a minor league signing with no risk, it's not a bad play to make. And there's going to be I think there's going to be a number of guys like that I think they're going to try to find maybe their seventh or eighth bullpen piece by bringing in a bunch of minor league guys on minor league deals, and just having a big tryout in spring training and see if you hit it on any of them. They're basically lottery tickets. I mean, that's what minor league signings are. These guys obviously don't have enough demand to even get guaranteed money or a guaranteed 40-man spot. So, you hand them out, you hand out an invite to spring training, and you see if you hit. And if you don't hit, it's no skin off your back. You just release them. So the Braves are going to do a number of these. Every time one of these pop, you get another round of fans being like, oh, here they go, bargain shopping again. But every team does this. Every team signs a bunch of minor league free agents to bring into camp just to compete for jobs. And, every team needs AAA depth. We've seen the last couple of years with the Braves, especially with the number of injuries they've had, like you use that depth quite a bit. It matters. Like the players you have at Gwinnett matter because you're one play away from that player being in Atlanta. So, I know they don't get a lot of pub, and I know people don't really care about them, but these deals matter. Guys like this, De La Cruz, Connor Capel, like those guys could end up playing roles on the Braves at some point. Even if the Braves go out and make bigger moves, injuries happen. So, why they don't get a lot of publicity, they are important. I think the Braves will continue to do them. Every team does. Bring in a bunch of guys and see if you catch lightning in a bottle and maybe get a real contributor for 2025.
Absolutely. And the other big, off-season story that, we've been kind of, paying attention to, Stephen, is, of course, the ever-evolving saga when it comes to just how the Braves are going to be viewed in 2025 and who's going to be able to view them. And there was actually news today that the Braves had agreed to basically a new, I don't necessarily know, a new addition to their overall media deal that they have in its position to offer a limited number of games to a bigger overall market than they currently have, through FanDuel, Sports South or FanDuel, whatever it's called. My point is that it seems to be a positive development that once again is aimed towards allowing a bigger crowd to be able to see the Braves in first person, or excuse me, to see the Braves live.
Yeah, so they struck a deal with Gray Media. Actually, I'm not familiar with Gray Media. They're not in my area. I don't live in Atlanta. I live in Birmingham, and we don't have it here. But apparently, they're a smaller media network that does have, stations all over the Southeast, in different states, and mainly in the Braves, footprint. And essentially, the deal today was just Gray Media is going to simulcast 15 additional games in the regular season, so that people that maybe otherwise didn't have access to Braves games will at least have access to those 15 games. And then on top of that, Gray Media is going to get the exclusive rights to 10 spring training games, which means you have to have Gray Media to watch those 10 spring training games. Now, I had people in my mentions freaking out a little bit because the press release wasn't super clear, because people are thinking, it's a new network that they don't have and they were going to lose Braves games. Nobody's losing any games because of this. This is purely addition. This is purely adding on a network to the Braves, media cycle that can show games to people that otherwise wouldn't have had access to games. So there's no cause for concern here. You're not losing any games. The only thing that's exclusive about this deal are the 10 spring training games, and those are likely games that you would not have had access to anyway. The Braves and FanDuel kind of famously only usually air about 4 or 5 spring training games a year anyway. So yes, there will be 10 exclusive spring training games on Gray Media, but if this deal had not happened, you wouldn't have had access to those 10 games anyway. And then the 15 regular season games are just simulcast. So they don't have exclusive rights to those games. They just have co-rights in a sense, essentially. So yeah, you're not losing, people were freaking, you're not losing any games because of this. Just people that maybe otherwise didn't have access to games will get a handful of games in 2025 that they can watch through. If you're somebody who lives in an area that has Gray Media, then you'll have access to 15 games that you otherwise wouldn't have had before this.
Yeah, to break it down a bit further, Gray seems to be more of like a regional network in the Southeast.
Yeah.
And people are probably not familiar with the name Gray because it's kind of Gray is the owner of media outlets in several markets. Like for instance, they own a certain television station here in Memphis, or they own a certain television station in Nashville.
I think they own Peachtree
Yes.
in Atlanta. So
Yeah.
if you're somebody who lives in Atlanta, and obviously a lot of our followers do, you know what Peachtree is.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know who this is better than we do probably.
So you're probably not going to be familiar with the name Gray Media, but you likely will be familiar with the news station that Gray Media owns in your market. So my encouragement would be for, if you're listening to Hammer Territory, if you saw the news today, go online and look and see. Gray Media will show all the different television stations that they own in the specific markets where they are, and that will provide you with the familiar name and thus the channel that you'll be able to be able to watch these Braves games on. So that's kind of how to break it down, how you're going to be able to actually get an additional option to be able to watch the Braves games. And Stephen, just a small build up to this, it doesn't seem as if this is something that's going to get in the way of what we talked about earlier in the offseason. It still very much seems that option through Amazon, where basically Braves fans can buy a separate streaming service to get all the games that they want. That certainly still seems to be on the table. All this stuff with Gray Media is in addition to what's been discussed around that option eventually coming down the line.
Yeah, and we still don't have details for the Amazon stuff. I know we said on that show that we did when it broke that we would talk about the details when we have them. We still don't have them. That's stuff that usually comes out in like late January, as fans really start gearing up to watch a full season. So once we have those details, we will obviously lay them out as best we can. But yeah, and this, this is a relatively small deal. It's 15 games, right? I mean, it's 15 out of 162 games. So I think this is a build up to maybe a bigger relationship down the line. Obviously the Braves are going to have their TV rights back in a couple of years. I think 2027 is the last year of this contract with Sinclair and Diamond Sports, which obviously just went through the big bankruptcy case that we covered in detail back a few weeks ago. But yeah, the Braves will get their rights back in 27, and they can do anything they want. They can start their own network. They can keep it all in house. They can go third party again, like they have for the better part of my life. So that'll be a big story in a couple of years about what they're going to do with their TV rights. But as of now, if you watch the team on Bally Sports last year, you'll watch them the exact same way this year. It's just under a new name, FanDuel. This deal today doesn't affect you in any way unless you are somebody who didn't get Braves games before. Like Shawn just said, you might be able to get them now. Check and see if Gray Media is the parent company of whatever network that you have in your area. But yeah, if you're somebody who's worried about that, this doesn't affect you at all. You still watch Braves games the same way you did last year.
And yeah, and I know that it also is continuing to be a bit of a weird offseason in terms of the developments that are happening. Of course, it was also announced that FanFest, I know that that had turned into a regional, event for many in Braves country. That actually is not going to happen this year. The Braves announced, but part of the reason why is because it looks like the focus is on making the 2025 All-Star game, which is going to be in Atlanta, which we're going to, as soon as the calendar turns to 2025, there's going to be ramping up for that. But while we're waiting for the Braves to make some moves, additional information on the new way to be able to view the Braves is going to be something to look forward to. But Steven, there also are a few other things on the horizon. Of course, we're probably coming into Hall of Fame season. I believe within the next, 3 to 4 weeks, we're going to see the 2025 Hall of Fame class announced. You have to feel pretty good about Billy Wagner's chances. You obviously are hoping that Andrew Jones could take another leap. I don't necessarily know if he'll take a big enough leap to be in the class itself this year, but you have to feel strongly that if he takes another leap, he'll be there in the next 1 to 2 years. And then we've also we're less than a month away from the international signing period. And in recent years, it's been noticed, the Braves, once again, I believe, are connected to one of the top position players. The Braves have really seemed to focus to try to put position player talent through the international market into their system here in recent years. So it'll be pretty important to kind of see how that plays out as well. So though nothing beats the direct moves the Braves can make to improve the big league squad in 2025, still some really fun things to look forward to, and it could be a rewarding offseason in those aspects for the Braves.
Yeah. FanFest being canceled. Neither Shawn or I live in Atlanta. It's much more of a local. If you're around, then you come. I don't know if it was always A-list members only, or if there was a way to get tickets for if you weren't an A-list member. Again, I don't live there, so I was never a part of it. I know some people were upset about it online. The Braves came out and put out a statement and said that they're doing a bunch of construction around the Battery, and they're getting ready for the 2025 All-Star game, like Shawn just said, so that they really didn't feel like they could put on a proper show. So they just canceled it for 2025. It didn't sound like from the press release that this was, there are some teams that have moved away from doing these annual Fan Fest and have moved to like every 3 years, every 5 years. It didn't sound like that was happening. This sounded like a one-off because the All-Star games come in because they're doing some construction on the Battery that they're just not going to do it this year. They didn't say anything about 2026. So if you're somebody, again, who lives in Atlanta, who went to this, I know a lot of people would love to go get like autographs and meet players maybe for the first time. I think it's going to be back in 26. They didn't say anything. So yeah, keep an eye on that. Hall of Fame voting. I'll be honest with you. I mute pretty much everything about Hall of Fame voting every time it comes around. I can't. The discourse around Hall of Fame voting is exhausting, to say the least. I hope Andrew gets in. Just as a Braves fan, I think he was, 10 Gold Gloves, the number of home runs he hit. He was certainly a flawed player. Obviously, he's not going to be a lock by any means to get in the Hall of Fame. But I think he's good enough. I think he's certainly better than some guys that have gotten in. So we'll see what happens with him. But yeah, international signing, we'll wait and see. Those guys the kids, they sign these days are like 15 years old. So, it's like, yeah, in 8 years, he might be a hell of a player. So I really don't spend a lot of time scouting, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids. But yeah, it's a big deal. Obviously, the Braves were, undercopied. The Braves had all those penalties and couldn't play in the international market for a number of years. And now the penalties are completely gone and the Braves are back to being able to, restock the pipeline with some talent. So that is important. It's just because I don't follow it doesn't mean it's not important. So yeah, that'll be notable. We'll talk about it when the Braves sign their guys, but we're just waiting on a move. I mean, honestly, we're just waiting on a move. We're just waiting on some sort of signing, some sort of trade, some sort of major league addition. It would be tremendous if Alex could maybe do one of those between now and Christmas to give us something, and maybe even like before the beginning of the new year. I don't know when it's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I mean, they're waiting to find the move they like. And they do have holes to fill. This does not, it's a very good team. Don't get me wrong. It's a very good team on paper. Still one of the best teams in baseball. But they do have clear holes that they got to fill. Left field, shortstop, starting pitcher, relief pitcher. I don't know if they'll get to all of those, but they certainly need to get to some of them. So we're just waiting, just like you. And obviously, whenever it happens, hopefully within like 20 minutes of it happening, we will be on here talking about it, the reaction, the fallout, what it means, all that stuff. So just like you at home, we are waiting.
Well, and of course, we know that this is a good way to end this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast, but do want to address a couple of bits of positive news. Of course, happy birthday to Ronald Acuna Jr., 27 years old. It is amazing to see when you break down the different statistical queries, Steven, that he has accomplished throughout his career. The level of production that he's had, when you also consider that of how many games he's missed, it's eye opening. So if you ever have the chance to, if you like to dance around with stats like I do and just want to see what players have accomplished what by the age of 27 and see the company that Ronald Acuna Jr. keep in mind, it becomes even more impressive when you consider how few games he has played. So obviously wishing him a speedy recovery. And then former two-time, I believe, Cy Young winner Corey Kluber has his podcast now, and he actually had Spencer Strider on his podcast recently as well. And there were some good updates from Spencer Strider. It certainly seems as if Strider feels like it won't be that far past opening day that he will be back on the mound ready to pitch for the Braves. It looks like everything's going good with his rehab, and I don't think anyone will deny that a clubhouse that has a Spencer Strider, a competitive Spencer Strider, a healthy Spencer Strider ready to pitch at a near Cy Young level, once again, that helps out the Braves in multiple ways. So, Stephen, certainly some positive vibes from two of our most important pillars of the future, and two guys we desperately are ready to not only get healthy but get back to their normal, top of the league selves.
Yeah. Happy birthday, Ronald. Of course. Get back soon. Brandon Gaudin, friend of the show, Brandon Gaudin. I think it's his birthday today as well. Saw that on Twitter.
Happy birthday.
He
just a few years older. Just a few years older than
just a couple, just one or two.
But nobody's counting.
Yeah, we love Brandon. So happy birthday to him. And then I did watch the Kluber podcast with Spencer. Very upbeat. He sounded very positive. He was talking about how he would be facing hitters in the end of February. So in his mind, he was going to have a relatively normal spring training. I think the Braves are going to play it very slow and very conservatively. They've already announced that he's not going to be ready for opening day, but the way he was talking, that was more of them being overly cautious than maybe what he necessarily needs. He was talking like he could potentially be ready for opening day if they needed it. If you're facing hitters in February, that's what everybody else is doing. So you're just going to have like a relatively normal spring training. Now, I'm guessing they will give him longer breaks in between his throw days than normal guys, which will back him up a little bit. But it was encouraging to hear Spencer talk. He was very confident that he was ready. He's going to be ready to go very soon after opening day. So, it's a great, Kluber, obviously being a former player, gets a lot of players on there. It's a great podcast. I have it That's one of my follows on Spotify, so it pops up anytime there's a new one. But yeah, it's a great podcast. And Spencer was on the latest one, so I suggest you go listen to that. But good news, definitely good news. Spencer is a massive part of 2025, especially now that Max Fried is gone. And until they sign another starting pitcher, right now they just got 4 that they can really count on that we know of, and that's Sale, Ronaldo Lopez, Spencer Swallenbach, and then Spencer Strider. And so if he's back relatively soon after opening day, that matters a lot, obviously. I mean, this guy's a Cy Young level pitcher. So it's a big deal. And hopefully it comes to fruition, knock on every piece of wood. Hopefully he stays healthy, no more setbacks, no more injuries. And we get a healthy Spencer Strider in 2025. That would be tremendous.
Absolutely. So, Stephen, pleasure talking with you once again. This may or may not be the last time we get together, before the holiday season. Now, I imagine that you'll see, one or both of us on some sort of show, before Christmas arrives. But until then, you can find Stephen Tolbert at B_outliers on Twitter/X. You can find me at StatsAC on Twitter/X. You can find Hammer Territory across all forms of social media. Of course, part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. And make sure you check out a great interview with Chipper Jones that the Foul Territory guys had earlier this week. A lot of insight from him. I know that many in Braves country have enjoyed Chipper being a bit more active when it comes to social media here recently. But make sure you check out a great interview with him on Foul Territory. But until next time, for Stephen Tolbert, my name's Shawn Coleman. If this is the last time we talk with you before, happy holidays and Merry Christmas to you. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory Podcast.